I'm Rachel, 35, and my heart shattered watching my daughter Brooke's face crumble. She'd spent 3 days cooking an elaborate feast for my mother Eleanor's 70th birthday. 18 guests were expected. Then my father Gerald's text arrived. We've decided to celebrate at Bellamy's restaurant instead. It's adults only. Sorry for the late notice. Something in me broke. After years of their disappointments, I wanted to explode, but didn't. Instead, I made a decision that changed everything. Before I continue this story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below, and hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever had to turn heartbreak into an opportunity. My relationship with my parents Eleanor and Gerald has always been complicated. My mother came from old money, the kind of family that had their name on university buildings. Her entire identity revolved around social climbing and maintaining the right appearances. She obsessively tracked which charity boards she served on and which country clubs had the right membership criteria. Every vacation, achievement, and milestone in our family was carefully curated to project an image of perfection. My father Gerald built his wealth through a commercial real estate empire. He started with one small property development in his 20s and expanded to shopping centers across 3 states. His success was impressive, but it came with an obsession about appearances that matched my mother's. Their world centered around impressing others, their friends, business associates, even strangers. Their validation came externally, and they raised me to follow that pattern. Growing up, their love felt conditional. When I brought home straight A's, won tennis tournaments, or dated the son of my father's business partner, they beamed with pride. But when I struggled in calculus, quit the debate team, or expressed interest in becoming a teacher rather than a lawyer, their disappointment was palpable. I learned early that their approval hinged on how well I made them look. Rachel, stand up straight. Mrs. Patterson is watching, my mother would whisper at social gatherings. Did you have to wear that? The Hendersons are bringing their son, my father would comment before dinner parties. Every accomplishment was measured against how it reflected on them. Every failure was a personal embarrassment. I internalized this messaging for years, believing my worth came from external validation. When I was 28, my carefully constructed life imploded. My marriage to James, a successful investment banker my parents adored, ended after 4 years. The divorce was amicable but devastating, especially when I discovered I was 2 months pregnant just as the papers were being finalized. My parents' reaction was predictable. My mother cried about what people would say. My father worried about the family name. Neither seemed concerned about my emotional state or the challenges of impending single motherhood. Eleanor actually suggested I might want to consider options, a veiled reference that I shut down immediately. I was keeping my baby regardless of the circumstances. The birth of Brooke shifted something in our family dynamic. Though my parents initially viewed her as evidence of my failure, she quickly became the unexpected joy in all our lives. My mother, particularly, formed a bond with Brooke that surprised everyone. Perhaps it was because Brooke was naturally gifted in ways Eleanor valued, artistic, musically talented, and socially adept. Or perhaps grandparenthood softened something in Eleanor that parenthood hadn't. Whatever the reason, Brooke adored her grandmother, and Eleanor seemed to genuinely love her in return. I did everything possible to maintain healthy relationships between Brooke and my parents. I swallowed my own hurt when they would cancel our plans last minute for more important engagements. I smiled through their subtle criticisms of my parenting. I pretended not to notice when they showered Brooke with expensive gifts while simultaneously making comments about my modest home or career choice. It's such a shame you're stuck in that tiny house when you could have had so much more, my mother would say while visiting, glancing disapprovingly at my comfortable but simple living room. Teaching? I suppose it's fulfilling even if the salary is modest, my father would comment, emphasizing the last word as though it pained him. I became a high school guidance counselor, a career that brought me genuine satisfaction but perpetual disappointment from my parents. In their eyes, I had wasted my potential and embarrassed them professionally. But my work helping teenagers navigate their paths gave me purpose in a way their approval never had. Despite the complicated history, Brooke developed a special relationship with Eleanor. They shared a love of classical music, vintage fashion, and French cuisine. Eleanor would take Brooke to the symphony, to high tea at fancy hotels, and occasionally on shopping trips that made me wince at the extravagance, but smile at my daughter's joy. That's why Eleanor's 70th birthday meant so much to Brooke. It represented a chance to give back to the grandmother who had shown her glimpses of unconditional love, even if that same unconditional love had never extended to me. The idea first sparked in Brooke's mind 3 months before Eleanor's birthday. We were having dinner at my parents' house, one of our monthly visits, when Eleanor mentioned a French dish her own grandmother used to make for special occasions. Coq au vin, Eleanor sighed wistfully. Nobody makes it like Grandmère did. With those tiny pearl onions and the cognac flambé right at the table. Such a production, but what memories those dinners created. I saw the spark in Brooke's eyes immediately. On the drive home, she couldn't stop talking about hosting a surprise birthday dinner. Mom, I could learn to make all of Grandma's favorite childhood dishes. We could transform our house, make it really special. It would be like giving her back pieces of her own childhood. I hesitated, knowing the work involved and my mother's exacting standards. Honey, that's a beautiful thought, but that's a lot of cooking for 18 people. Maybe we could do something smaller. Brooke shook her head firmly. No, it has to be special. I've been saving from my bookstore job. I can afford the ingredients if we plan carefully. For the next 3 months, Brooke transformed into a culinary historian. She called my mother's older cousin Beatrice to gather family recipes. She researched techniques for dishes that hadn't been common since the 1950s. She created meticulous shopping lists, budgeting spreadsheets, and preparation timelines. Watching her dedication touched me deeply. She worked extra shifts at the local bookstore, carefully setting aside money each week for ingredients. She practiced complicated techniques on weekends, mastering puff pastry, clarifying consommé, and perfecting the temperature for tempering chocolate. The week of the birthday, Brooke asked for 3 days off school, something the straight-A student had never done before. Her teachers, knowing her academic standing and the reason for her absence, graciously provided assignments in advance. The first day of cooking focused on desserts and items that could be frozen. Brooke made a traditional opera cake with 20 thin layers of almond sponge, coffee buttercream, and chocolate ganache. She prepared pot au choux for cream puffs that would be assembled last minute. She made homemade ice cream in Eleanor's favorite childhood flavor, butter pecan with ribbons of salted caramel. Do you think the ice cream is too sweet? Brooke asked, offering me a spoonful. Her face was smudged with flour, her hair pulled back in a messy bun, but her eyes shone with purpose. It's perfect, I assured her, amazed at her natural talent. Grandma will love it. The second day focused on sides, salads, and marinating the main dishes. Our refrigerator filled with containers of marinated meat, chopped vegetables, and prepared sauces. Brooke moved through our kitchen with surprising efficiency, consulting her detailed timeline hourly. She prepared a classic Waldorf salad, the kind that had been served at Eleanor's childhood country club. She made tiny cornichon and ham tartlets from a recipe that had appeared in my grandmother's favorite women's magazine in 1952. She spent hours forming miniature potato croquettes, each one perfectly shaped and ready for final frying. These are Grandma's favorites, she explained, showing me the delicate asparagus spears wrapped in prosciutto. Great-grandma used to serve these at her bridge club luncheons. By the third day, our modest home had been transformed. Brooke had rented linens in Eleanor's favorite shade of blue. She'd arranged flowers in vintage crystal vases borrowed from a neighbor. She'd polished silver candlesticks that had been a wedding present I rarely used. The dining room table was extended to its full length with both leaves inserted. Brooke had created handwritten place cards for all 18 family members, decorating each with a small watercolor illustration personalized to the guest. For Eleanor's, she'd painted a miniature replica of the lakeside cottage where my mother had spent childhood summers. The piece de resistance was the birthday cake, a 3-tiered creation covered in pale blue fondant, with handcrafted sugar flowers cascading down one side. Brooke had incorporated family photos printed on edible paper, creating a timeline of Eleanor's life around the bottom tier. Do you think she'll like it? Brooke asked, adjusting a sugar rose. Is it elegant enough? My throat tightened with emotion. It's the most beautiful cake I've ever seen. She'll be overwhelmed. As evening approached, our home filled with mouth-watering aromas. The coq au vin simmered, releasing scents of wine, herbs, and caramelized onions. The beef Wellington rested, its pastry golden and flaky. Cheese soufflés waited by the oven, ready to be baked at the last minute. Brooke had just changed into a simple blue dress that matched the decor when my phone chimed with a text message. A message that would change everything. The text arrived at 2:13 p.m., exactly 5 hours before the guests were supposed to arrive. I was helping Brooke arrange the final decorations when my phone pinged with my father's distinctive notification sound. Thinking he was confirming details, I glanced down casually. The message read, "We've decided to celebrate at Bellamy's restaurant instead. It's adults only. Sorry for the late notice." I stared at the screen, certain I had misunderstood. I read it again and again. The words remained unchanged, their meaning undeniable. My parents had unilaterally changed plans for Eleanor's birthday, without consulting us, without consideration for Brooke's monumental effort, and with barely an apology for the late notice. A follow-up text appeared, "You're welcome to join us at 8. Table for 20 at Bellamy's. Black tie preferred." My hands shook as I tried to process what was happening. Bellamy's was the most exclusive restaurant in town, the kind with a 6-month waiting list and entrees that cost more than a day's salary for me. Black tie preferred meant my father expected tuxedos and evening gowns, and adults only meant Brooke, the person who had poured her heart into the celebration, wasn't welcome. I immediately called my father, but the call went straight to voicemail. I tried my mother with the same result. With growing dread, I opened social media and discovered posts from 2 days earlier. My cousin Abigail sharing excitement about the elegant birthday soiree at Bellamy's, my Aunt Diane asking about appropriate gifts for a sophisticated evening out. They had planned this days ago. Everyone knew except us. I pieced together what had happened through scattered comments and responses. Eleanor's wealthy friend Penelope had suggested Bellamy's after learning about our quaint home dinner. She had connections with the owner and could secure the exclusive private dining room despite the waiting list. My mother, unable to resist the allure of celebrating at the most prestigious venue in town rather than her daughter's modest home, had eagerly accepted. The realization hit me like a physical blow. Once again, image and social status mattered more to my parents than genuine connection or consideration. The fact that it was at Brooke's expense made it unbearable. I stood in our beautifully decorated dining room, surrounded by evidence of my daughter's love and labor, and felt a familiar anger rising, an anger I had suppressed countless times throughout my life. But this time, it wasn't about me. It was about Brooke, and that made it infinitely worse. In that moment, I had to decide how to break the news to my daughter, who was in the kitchen putting final touches on the birthday cake. I could hear her humming softly, completely unaware that her efforts were about to be rendered meaningless. I took a deep breath and walked into the kitchen. Brooke looked up with a smile that quickly faded when she saw my expression. "Mom? What's wrong?" I showed her the text. I couldn't bring myself to soften the blow with platitudes or excuses. She deserved the unvarnished truth, even though it would hurt. Brooke read the message once, twice, 3 times, just as I had. Her expression didn't crumble dramatically. There were no immediate tears or outbursts. Instead, something more heartbreaking happened. I watched as a quiet devastation washed over her features, followed by a resigned understanding that seemed far too mature for her 17 years. "Oh," she said softly. "I see." That simple response broke me more than any tears could have. Because I recognized it. It was the same quiet acceptance I had perfected over decades of similar disappointments. The realization that my daughter had already learned to expect such treatment made my stomach churn. They must have had their reasons," Brooke said, her voice small but determined to be understanding. She carefully set down the piping bag she'd been using on the cake. "Maybe Grandma preferred a restaurant. Maybe?" "No," I interrupted firmly. "There's no excuse for this, honey. Not for the last-minute notice, not for excluding you, not for any of it." Brooke nodded, but I could see she was struggling to process the rejection. Her eyes swept across the kitchen, at the magnificent cake she'd spent hours decorating, at the containers of food prepared with such care, at the handwritten menu cards stacked neatly on the counter. "What did I do wrong?" she asked quietly, and the question pierced straight through my heart. Because it was the exact question I had asked myself countless times throughout my childhood when faced with my parents' conditional approval. It was the internalized belief that if only I had been better, smarter, more accomplished, more socially adept, then perhaps I would have been worthy of their unconditional love. In that moment, watching history repeat itself with my daughter, something fundamental shifted inside me. The protective instinct that surged through me wasn't just about this specific incident. It was about breaking a generational pattern of emotional manipulation and conditional love. "You did absolutely nothing wrong," I said, taking her hands in mine. "Nothing. This isn't about you or anything you did or didn't do. This is about them and their priorities." Brooke nodded again, but I could see she didn't fully believe me. She glanced at the cake, Eleanor's face smiling from one of the edible photographs, and for a brief moment, her composure cracked. "I just wanted to make her happy," she whispered, a single tear sliding down her cheek. That single, quiet tear, was my breaking point. I had spent my entire life accommodating my parents' behavior, making excuses for their actions, protecting Brooke from the full impact of their conditional love. But standing in our kitchen, surrounded by evidence of my daughter's extraordinary effort and genuine love, I knew something had to change. I couldn't control my parents' actions, but I could control how we responded to them. And I refused to let this moment become another scar on Brooke's heart. My first instinct was to call my parents back and unleash decades of suppressed frustration. To demand they acknowledge the hurt they'd caused. To insist they change their plans and honor Brooke's efforts. But as I looked at my daughter, still processing her disappointment with quiet dignity, I realized confrontation wouldn't heal this wound. It might satisfy my anger temporarily, but it wouldn't address the deeper issue. Brooke needed to know her effort mattered, even if not to the intended recipients. I took a deep breath and made a decision that prioritized healing over confrontation. "Brooke," I said gently, "let's sit down for a minute." We sat at our kitchen island, surrounded by the fruits of her labor, the exquisite food, the beautiful decorations, the love poured into every detail. "I'm furious with your grandparents right now," I admitted, choosing honesty. "But I'm also incredibly proud of what you've accomplished here." This wasn't just about a party, it was about showing love through action. And that matters, regardless of how others respond. Brooke nodded, wiping away the lone tear that had escaped. "I know. I really wanted Grandma to see everything. I understand. And I'm not going to pretend this doesn't hurt, because it does. It's okay to feel disappointed and upset. Those feelings are completely valid." We sat in silence for a moment, letting the reality of the situation settle around us. Then I asked the question that would redirect our evening. "So what do we do with all this amazing food you've prepared?" Brooke looked around, considering. "I guess we could freeze some of it." "Or," I said, an idea forming, "we could still host a dinner. Just for different guests." "Like who?" I thought about the community center where I volunteered twice a month, a place that provided resources, meals, and fellowship for people from all walks of life. People who would genuinely appreciate a home-cooked meal prepared with care. What if we called Marlene at the community center? Asked if we could host an impromptu dinner there tonight? For people who would truly appreciate your incredible cooking. I watched as Brooke considered the idea, a small spark reigniting in her eyes. We could do that? We absolutely could. And I bet we could find plenty of people to join us with just a few phone calls. Brooke glanced at the dining room, set for 18 with our best china and the rented linens. "But what about all the decorations? We'll pack them up and take them with us. We'll transform the community center just like we did our dining room." For the first time since reading the text, Brooke's lips curved into a small smile. That could actually be really nice. I squeezed her hand. "It won't erase the hurt, honey. I won't pretend it will. But it might help us transform this disappointment into something meaningful." We sprang into action. I called Marlene, the community center director, explaining our situation and asking if we could use the space on short notice. "Rachel, are you kidding me?" Marlene responded enthusiastically. "We'd be honored. The center is open until 9 tonight anyway for the weekly senior social, but only about 10 people usually come. Having a special dinner would be incredible." Next, I reached out to friends and neighbors. My best friend Sarah and her husband Michael immediately offered to help transport food and decorations. My colleague Tanya promised to spread the word among the teachers at school. My neighbor Frank, a retired chef, volunteered to help serve and keep the hot dishes at perfect temperature. Within an hour, we had an overwhelming response. People weren't just willing to attend, They were eager to help, touched by Brooke's story and determined to make the evening special. As we packed containers of food into coolers and carefully boxed the elaborate cake, Brooke's spirits visibly lifted. Her movements became more purposeful, her expression more determined. "Mom," she said suddenly, looking up from wrapping the cream puffs, "could we invite the residents from Sunshine Meadows too? The ones who never get visitors." Sunshine Meadows was the assisted living facility where Brooke volunteered on weekends, reading to residents and helping with activity programs. Many of the residents rarely had family visits. "That's a beautiful idea," I said, feeling a surge of pride at my daughter's compassionate heart. "I'll call the activities director right now." While I made arrangements with Sunshine Meadows, Brooke called several of her favorite teachers. She hesitated before calling Ms. Thompson, her culinary arts teacher, who had provided guidance on some of the more complex recipes. "I'm nervous to tell Ms. Thompson," Brooke admitted. She was so excited about me making all these traditional French dishes. "Honey, Ms. Thompson will be impressed by your cooking regardless of who eats it. And I think she'll be even more impressed by how you're handling the situation." Brooke nodded and made the call. From her animated conversation and the relieved smile that followed, I could tell Ms. Thompson had responded with the kindness and support that made her such a beloved teacher. As we worked, I noticed Brooke's transformation. The initial devastation had given way to purposeful action. She wasn't just going through the motions, she was genuinely excited about the new plan. She began suggesting modifications to make the dinner even more special for our new guests. "We should make sure everything is easily accessible for the seniors," she said, rearranging items in a cooler. "And maybe we could create little take-home packages of desserts for people to enjoy later?" In the midst of packing, Sarah and Michael arrived to help. As we loaded their SUV with decorations and table settings, Sarah pulled me aside. "How are you doing with all this?" she asked quietly. "I know how much effort you both put into this." I glanced at Brooke, who was carefully explaining to Michael how to transport the three-tiered cake. "I'm angry at my parents," I admitted. But watching Brooke transform her disappointment into something beautiful, I am just incredibly proud of her. Sarah squeezed my arm. "She learned that resilience from you, you know." Her words caught me off guard. Had I modeled resilience? Or had I modeled tolerance of poor treatment? The distinction suddenly seemed crucially important. By 6 o'clock, the time the original guests should have been arriving at our home, we were instead setting up at the community center. Volunteers had helped transport everything, and the transformation was remarkable. The center's simple multipurpose room now featured elegant table settings, floral arrangements, and soft lighting from the candles Brooke had carefully selected. As we put the finishing touches on the space, I watched my daughter direct volunteers with confidence and grace. When the first Sunshine Meadows residents began to arrive, I saw Brooke straighten her shoulders and smile, a genuine smile that reached her eyes. In that moment, I realized we weren't just salvaging a ruined evening. We were creating something far more meaningful than the original plan could ever have been. The community center transformed from a utilitarian space into something magical in record time. The folding tables were covered with the blue linens Brooke had rented. The mismatched community center chairs disappeared under white chair covers. Twinkling string lights were hung along the walls, creating a warm, inviting atmosphere. At 6:30 p.m., the first guests began to arrive, residents from Sunshine Meadows Assisted Living Facility. Most were in their 80s and 90s, some using walkers or wheelchairs, all dressed in their finest clothes for what they'd been told was a special surprise dinner. Mr. Jenkins, an 85-year-old veteran with no remaining family, arrived wearing a suit that hung loosely on his thin frame, a faded boutonniere pinned to his lapel. "Young lady," he said to Brooke as she greeted him, "I haven't worn this suit since my grandson's wedding 5 years ago. But they said a beautiful girl had prepared a fancy dinner, so I had to dress appropriately." Brooke's face flushed with pleasure as she escorted him to a seat at the head table. "I'm so glad you wore it, Mr. Jenkins. You look very handsome." Next came the Williams family, a young couple with 3 children who had been going through significant financial hardship after Mr. Williams lost his job. Mrs. Williams had tears in her eyes as she took in the elegant setting. "We haven't been able to eat out in months," she whispered to me. "The children are so excited. They've been practicing their restaurant manners all afternoon." Ms. Thompson, Brooke's culinary arts teacher, arrived with her elderly mother. She immediately sought out Brooke, enveloping her in a warm hug. "I'm so proud of you," I overheard her say. "Not just for the cooking, but for your gracious spirit. That's the true mark of a chef, adaptability and generosity." By 7:00 p.m., the room was filled with an eclectic mix of people: seniors from Sunshine Meadows, regular attendees of the community center's programs, teachers from Brooke's school, neighbors, friends, and even a few of my counseling students who wanted to support us. What struck me most was the genuine atmosphere. Unlike the carefully orchestrated social events my parents preferred, where conversations were strategic and appearances paramount, this gathering buzzed with authentic connection. People who might never have met were chatting like old friends. Age, socioeconomic status, and background melted away in the warmth of shared humanity. When all 43 guests had arrived, far more than the original 18, Brooke stood nervously to welcome everyone. "Thank you all for coming on such short notice," she began, her voice initially shaky but growing stronger. "This dinner was originally planned for my grandmother's 70th birthday, but plans changed unexpectedly. Instead, I'm honored to share it with all of you." The sincerity in her voice touched everyone. There was no need to explain further. Most already knew the backstory through the rapid community grapevine. "Everything you'll eat tonight has a story behind it," Brooke continued. "These are dishes from my grandmother's childhood, recipes that have been in our family for generations. I hope you enjoy them as much as I enjoyed preparing them for you." As the serving began, with Brooke's friends from school volunteering as servers, I watched nervously for people's reactions to the sophisticated menu. Would the coq au vin be too exotic? Would the delicate asparagus spears wrapped in prosciutto seem too pretentious? My concerns dissolved as I witnessed the genuine appreciation on every face. Mr. Jenkins closed his eyes in bliss after tasting the beef Wellington. "Young lady," he called out to Brooke, "I haven't had food this good since Paris in 1960. And I dare say yours might be better." The Williams children, initially intimidated by the formal place settings, were now exclaiming with delight over the tiny cheese soufflés. "It's like eating a cloud," the youngest exclaimed. Ms. Diaz, an elderly woman from the community center's English language program, approached Brooke with tears in her eyes. "In my country, before I came to America, my mother made special meals like this. You have given me back a memory I thought was lost." Throughout the evening, people kept approaching Brooke with compliments, questions about recipes, and expressions of gratitude. I watched as my daughter blossomed under their genuine appreciation. There was no pretense here, no social obligation driving their praise, just honest enjoyment and gratitude. When it came time for dessert, Brooke hesitated briefly before bringing out the elaborately decorated birthday cake. She had removed the Happy 70th Birthday Eleanor inscription, but kept the timeline of photos, now a conversation piece rather than a personalized tribute. This was meant to be a birthday cake, she explained as people admired the craftsmanship, but I think it works perfectly as a celebration of community. Mr. Jenkins, who had become something of an honored guest at the head table, stood shakily with his water glass raised. "I'd like to propose a toast," he announced, his voice wavering but clear. "To Brooke, who turned disappointment into a gift for all of us. And to community, the family we choose." To community, everyone echoed, raising their glasses. As people enjoyed the magnificent cake and other desserts, someone connected a phone to the center's speaker system, playing gentle jazz standards, the kind of music that appealed to all generations present. Mr. Peterson, a spry 92-year-old from Sunshine Meadows, asked Ms. Thompson to dance, and soon a small dance floor had formed in the corner. The Williams children organized a game of musical chairs for the younger attendees, while some of the seniors taught Brooke's school friends how to play bridge at one of the tables. The barriers that typically separate people, age, background, circumstance, seemed to dissolve as the evening progressed. I found myself sitting with Sarah, watching Brooke move through the room, checking that everyone had enough food, engaging in conversations, and absolutely glowing with the joy of serving others. "Look at her," Sarah said softly. "I don't think I've ever seen her this confident." "I know," I replied, feeling a complex mix of emotions. She's found something here that she wouldn't have experienced at the original dinner. As the evening extended well beyond the planned end time, no one seemed eager to leave. I noticed Brooke deep in conversation with Mr. Jenkins. He appeared to be describing something with animated hand gestures, and she was taking notes on a napkin. Later, she explained excitedly, Mr. Jenkins was a chef in the army. He's teaching me his secret recipe for the perfect roux. He says it's been in his family for generations, but he has no one to pass it on to. That moment crystallized the unexpected gift of the evening, new connections that would never have formed otherwise. Brooke wasn't just serving food. She was collecting stories, forming relationships, and experiencing the genuine appreciation her efforts deserved. By the time we started packing up at nearly 10 o'clock, 3 hours later than planned, Brooke was exhausted but radiating happiness. As volunteers helped clean up, people kept approaching to thank her, to request recipes, to invite her to cook for other community events. The Williams children had carefully packed take-home containers for everyone, Brooke's idea, ensuring that the seniors from Sunshine Meadows would have another delicious meal the next day. As we loaded the last of our supplies into Sarah's car, Brooke turned to me with eyes bright despite her exhaustion. "Mom," she said quietly, "I'm really glad things turned out this way." And in that moment, I realized that while we couldn't control how others treated us, we had complete control over how we responded. My daughter had chosen generosity over bitterness, community over exclusivity, and authentic connection over social performance. In doing so, she taught me a lesson I'd been struggling to learn my entire life. The next morning, my phone exploded with notifications. People had posted photos and videos of the community dinner across social media, tagging Brooke and praising her culinary talents and generous spirit. Our local neighborhood page featured several posts about the amazing young chef and her heartwarming community feast. I scrolled through dozens of comments, smiling at the genuine appreciation people had expressed. Ms. Thompson had posted a particularly touching tribute. As a culinary arts teacher, I occasionally encounter students with exceptional talent. Rarely do I encounter students with exceptional character. Brooke possesses both in abundance. Last night, she demonstrated grace under pressure, turning personal disappointment into community joy. Her technical skills are impressive, but her heart is what will make her truly successful in life and in the culinary world. Brooke was still sleeping, exhausted from 3 days of cooking and the emotional roller coaster of the previous day, when my phone rang with my mother's distinctive ringtone. I hesitated before answering, still raw from yesterday's disappointment. "Hello, Mom," I answered, keeping my voice neutral. "Rachel," Eleanor began, her tone oddly strained. I saw the posts about some sort of community dinner." Of course she had. Eleanor monitored social media meticulously, concerned always with family appearance and social standing. "Yes," I replied simply, not offering further explanation. An uncomfortable silence stretched between us. Finally, Eleanor spoke again. "It looked nice. Very charitable of you both." The word charitable, with its implication of noblesse oblige rather than genuine connection, ignited the anger I'd been controlling. "It wasn't charity, Mom. It was community. And it happened because Brooke spent 3 days cooking an elaborate birthday dinner for you, only to be told 5 hours before that you'd decided on Bellamy's instead. With no children allowed." Another silence, then, well, Penelope pulled strings to get us the private room at Bellamy's. It was quite exclusive. We could hardly say no. Actually, you could have. You could have said, "My granddaughter has been planning a special dinner for months. We're committed to that. Rachel, be reasonable." It was Bellamy's. The waiting list is. "I don't care if the waiting list is 3 years long," I interrupted, surprising myself with my firmness. "Brooke put her heart into that dinner for you." I heard muffled voices, then my father came on the line. "Rachel, this is ridiculous. You're making a scene over nothing. Eleanor had a lovely birthday. You chose not to join us. That was your decision." "No, Dad. You excluded your only granddaughter from her grandmother's birthday celebration after she spent 3 days cooking a gourmet meal specifically designed around Mom's favorite childhood foods. That was your decision. Now see here," Gerald's voice took on the authoritative tone he'd used throughout my childhood when I dared to challenge him. "I don't appreciate you airing family business all over social media. It's embarrassing." Something snapped inside me. Decades of accommodating their behavior, of making excuses for their conditional love, of prioritizing their comfort over my own well-being, it all crystallized into perfect clarity. What's embarrassing, I said, my voice steady despite my racing heart, is how you've consistently valued appearances over relationships. How you've repeatedly shown Brooke that your social standing matters more than her efforts and love. How you've created a pattern of disappointment that she's starting to accept as normal, just like I did for years. That's absolutely. I'm not finished, I continued, surprising myself with my assertiveness. For years, I've made excuses for your behavior. I've pretended it didn't hurt when you canceled plans last minute for more important engagements. I've smiled through your criticisms of my home, my career, my parenting. I've done everything possible to maintain a relationship between you and Brooke because I thought having grandparents in her life, even flawed ones, was better than no grandparents at all. I took a deep breath before continuing. But yesterday crossed a line. And I won't allow Brooke to normalize the kind of conditional love I grew up with. She deserves better. The silence on the other end was profound. Finally, my mother spoke, her voice smaller than I'd ever heard it. What are you saying, Rachel? I'm saying that moving forward, our relationship needs to change. I'm setting boundaries. If you want to be part of our lives, you need to demonstrate through actions, not words, not gifts, not social opportunities, that you value Brooke for who she is, not how she makes you look. This is absurd, my father interjected. We've given that girl everything. The clothes, the music lessons, the things, I interrupted. You've given her things. What she needed was your presence, your genuine interest, your willingness to show up for her, even when it didn't align with your social calendar. The conversation continued in circles, with my parents alternating between defensiveness, minimization, and occasional glimpses of genuine confusion about my perspective. It was clear that they truly didn't understand the impact of their actions, that their worldview was so centered around external validation that they couldn't comprehend prioritizing relationships over appearances. By the end of the call, nothing was resolved, but something had fundamentally changed. I had spoken my truth clearly and set firm boundaries for the first time in my life. Later that afternoon, Eleanor called Brooke directly. I offered my daughter privacy for the conversation, but she shook her head, putting the phone on speaker as we sat together on the couch. Brooke, darling, Eleanor began, her voice attempting its usual carefully cultivated warmth. I wanted to check on you. Your mother seems quite upset about yesterday. Brooke met my eyes seeking guidance, but I simply nodded encouragingly. This was her relationship, her hurt, her opportunity to express herself. I was disappointed, Grandma, Brooke said simply. I worked really hard on that dinner for you. Yes, well, these things happen. Social obligations, you understand. When you're older. I'm not sure age has anything to do with it, Brooke interrupted gently. It's about priorities, isn't it? The wisdom in her response, echoing the very realizations I'd come to, made my heart swell with pride. Well, Eleanor seemed genuinely flustered. We had a lovely evening at Bellamy's. Perhaps you could make those dishes for us another time? A private dinner. Maybe, Brooke replied, non-committal. But I'm actually thinking of starting a monthly community dinner at the center. Mr. Jenkins and some of the other seniors want to teach me their family recipes. I watched as Brooke subtly but firmly established her own boundary, not cutting off her grandmother, but not rushing to accommodate her either. In the days that followed, various family members reached out, having heard versions of the story through the family grapevine. Some were defensive of my parents, citing their generosity and status in predictable ways. Others, surprisingly, expressed support. My sister Jennifer called midweek, her voice unusually hesitant. I should have said something when Mom changed the plans, she admitted. I knew about Brooke's dinner. It didn't feel right, but you know how they are. I do know, I agreed. That's why I'm finally saying something. It's brave, Jennifer said after a pause. I'm not sure I could do it. Her words made me realize that setting boundaries wasn't just about protecting Brooke. It was about breaking generational patterns that had affected my entire family. The week following the incident was emotionally exhausting, but ultimately clarifying. Establishing boundaries with parents who had never respected them resulted in predictable pushback, guilt trips, and attempts at manipulation. But watching Brooke process the experience with such maturity gave me strength. I'm still sad about what happened, she confided one evening as we prepared dinner together, a simple meal after the elaborate cooking marathon of the previous week. But I keep thinking about Mr. Jenkins saying he hadn't had a home-cooked meal like that in years. And the Williams kids being so excited about the fancy desserts. It felt really good to make people happy. You did more than make them happy, I told her. You created connection. That's a rare and valuable gift. Brooke nodded thoughtfully. I think I understand something now, Mom. About Grandma and Grandpa. What's that? They're so busy trying to impress people that they miss actually connecting with them. And that seems really lonely. Her insight, compassionate even in the face of her own hurt, moved me deeply. My daughter had grasped something that had taken me decades to understand, that my parents' behavior stemmed not from strength, but from insecurity, not from malice, but from a fundamental misunderstanding of what truly matters in life. As the week progressed, I noticed small, tentative shifts in Eleanor's communication, texts that seemed less performative, questions that appeared more genuinely interested in Brooke's activities. Whether these represented real change or merely tactical adjustments remained to be seen. But for the first time, I wasn't anxiously trying to interpret and accommodate their behavior. I was simply observing it, responding authentically, and maintaining the boundaries I'd established. It was uncomfortable. It was occasionally painful. But it was also, in its own way, liberating. 1 month after the birthday dinner incident, subtle but significant shifts had occurred in our family dynamics. Eleanor had begun making tentative efforts to repair her relationship with Brooke. She called more regularly, asked questions about Brooke's interests, and even attended one of her school choir performances, sitting quietly in the audience without drawing attention to herself, a notable departure from her usual behavior. Gerald remained more resistant to change. His communication was still primarily focused on material things, offering to buy Brooke a new laptop, suggesting exclusive summer programs, rather than genuine connection. But even he showed small signs of awareness, occasionally asking about the community dinners that had become Brooke's passion project. Those monthly dinners had transformed from an impromptu solution into a meaningful tradition. The community center had officially partnered with Brooke to host Family Table, a monthly event where people from all walks of life shared a meal together. Each dinner featured recipes contributed by community members, with Brooke coordinating a team of volunteer cooks. The confidence I observed in my daughter now was remarkable. She moved through the kitchen with authority, teaching seniors and children alike how to prepare dishes from various cultures. Her natural teaching ability reminded me of myself, though her culinary talents far exceeded mine. Mom, Mr. Jenkins taught me his grandmother's gumbo recipe today, she announced excitedly after one volunteer session. He said it's a family secret, but since he considers me honorary family now, I'm allowed to know it. These new connections, this chosen family that had formed around shared passions and genuine appreciation, had healed the wound of rejection in ways I hadn't anticipated. Brooke wasn't just recovering from disappointment, she was thriving because of the new path it had revealed. One Wednesday evening, as we cleaned up after dinner, Brooke casually mentioned that she'd decided on her focus for college. I want to study culinary arts with a focus on food anthropology, she said, rinsing a plate. Learning the cultural and historical significance of traditional recipes. Maybe eventually write a cookbook about immigrant family recipes and the stories behind them. That sounds perfect for you, I replied, genuinely impressed by the thoughtfulness of her plan. Your work at the community center has really shaped this vision, hasn't it? Brooke nodded. If Grandma had shown up for that birthday dinner, I might still be focused on fancy French cuisine and impressing people. Now I understand that food is really about connection and preservation of culture. Mr. Jenkins taught me that. Mrs. Diaz too. The wisdom in her observation struck me deeply. What had begun as a painful rejection had redirected Brooke's talent and passion towards something more meaningful than impressing elite social circles. She was developing a culinary philosophy grounded in community and cultural appreciation rather than exclusivity and status. As spring advanced toward summer, Brooke received an unexpected opportunity. A local newspaper had covered one of her community dinners, and a representative from a culinary school in New York contacted her about their summer program for promising young chefs. They're offering me a scholarship, she explained, showing me the email. 2 weeks of intensive training with a focus on traditional techniques from around the world. That's incredible, I exclaimed, reading the prestigious school's glowing invitation. Will you accept? Brooke bit her lip thoughtfully. I want to, but it overlaps with Grandma's charity gala weekend. She mentioned hoping I'd attend. I studied my daughter's face, recognizing the conflict there, the desire to pursue her passion versus the lingering hope for her grandmother's approval. In that moment, I realized how much healthier our family dynamics had become. Brooke wasn't automatically sacrificing her opportunity for Eleanor's preferences. She was weighing her options thoughtfully. "What are you thinking?" I asked, careful not to influence her decision. "I'm thinking that Grandma's gala happens every year, but this opportunity is special," she said slowly. "And I think part of respecting myself is prioritizing my growth sometimes." I nodded, chest tightening with pride at her self-awareness. "I think that's very wise." When Brooke called Eleanor to explain her decision, I watched nervously, unsure how my mother would respond to not being the priority. To my surprise, Eleanor's reaction was measured. "Well, that sounds like a valuable opportunity," she said after a brief pause. "Perhaps we could have lunch before you leave for New York? I'd like to hear more about this program." It wasn't effusive support, but it was acceptance, a small but significant step toward a healthier relationship. As summer approached, our new normal continued to evolve. The boundaries I'd established created occasional tension, but ultimately more authentic interactions. Instead of performing roles based on expectations, we were gradually learning to relate to each other as real, flawed human beings. One evening, after finishing preparation for the monthly community dinner, Brooke and I sat on our porch swing, enjoying the warm June air. "Mom," she said thoughtfully, "I've been thinking about forgiveness a lot lately." "Oh," I prompted, curious about her thoughts. "I was really hurt when Grandma and Grandpa bailed on the birthday dinner. I put so much of myself into that meal." She traced patterns on her glass of lemonade. "But I'm not angry anymore." "Not really." "That's a generous perspective," I noted. "It's not about them deserving forgiveness," Brooke clarified. "It's about me not wanting to carry that hurt anymore, and realizing that they're limited by their own understanding of what matters." Her insight, so mature for her 17 years, moved me deeply. Brooke had grasped something that had taken me decades to understand, that forgiveness isn't about excusing harmful behavior, but about freeing oneself from the burden of resentment. Besides, she continued with a small smile, if they hadn't canceled, I might never have met Mr. Jenkins or started the community dinners. Sometimes disappointments lead to unexpected gifts. As I reflected on the journey of the past month, I realized that the painful incident had catalyzed growth for both of us. I had finally found the courage to establish healthy boundaries with my parents after decades of accommodation. Brooke had discovered a deeper purpose for her culinary talents and developed resilience that would serve her throughout life. We couldn't control how others treated us, even those who should love us unconditionally. But we could control how we responded to disappointment. We could choose bitterness or growth, isolation or community, resentment or creative transformation. The text that had initially shattered our plans had ultimately strengthened our spirits. The dinner prepared with such care had found its perfect recipients, even if they weren't the originally intended guests. And the love Brooke had poured into her cooking had returned to her multiplied, from the genuine appreciation of people who valued her efforts without condition. As the summer sun set behind our modest home, I realized that this was the most valuable lesson I could have taught my daughter. That our worth isn't determined by others' validation, that genuine connection matters more than social status, and that sometimes the most beautiful opportunities emerge from our greatest disappointments. If you've ever had to transform disappointment into something beautiful, I'd love to hear your story in the comments below. How did you handle a situation where plans fell through or someone let you down? What unexpected gifts came from that experience? Don't forget to like this video if Brooke's journey resonated with you, subscribe for more stories about resilience and growth, and share with someone who might need a reminder that rejection can sometimes be redirection to something better. Thank you for being part of our community, and remember, the most meaningful connections often come when we open our hearts to unexpected possibilities.